Well, there was a point this year when investors couldn't get enough of copper, hopes for a long-term trend that would benefit cyclical businesses, coupled with, for example, excitement over copper's place in the tech world, from its role in electric vehicles to, in the case of the AI boom, data centers. But copper has had a steep drop from its May highs, off about 20%. Increasingly, there are worries about the growth story out of China, for example. Seems to be certainly one of the considerations. What are the others? Let's ask Reid I'anson, commodity economist at Kpler. Reid, great to have you with us. Thanks for the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You know, there's so much movement in the markets right now. Take your pick on where you want to focus your lens, but that 20% slide for copper really is eye-opening. So what's been your perspective on what's going on?
Well, it's interesting to back up to the start of the year. We saw this huge surge in prices, a lot of interest within the paper market. It was our view at the time, though, that the fundamental backdrop remained weak for copper. And by the time we got to May, that thesis started to play out. People started to realize that, especially in China, which is the driver of copper demand globally, the fundamental backdrop really just wasn't there, especially across the property market. I think it is important to keep in mind that thankfully in China, you still have this large renewable build out there, which is helping to support copper demand. But until the property market in China starts to show at least some signs of flattening out, I think weakness within the spot market will remain.
So demand is one part of the story. Obviously, supply is always the other piece of the equation. How well supplied is the market, and how does that factor into performance?
Supply is looks pretty strong right now. If you look at the International Copper Study Group, they released numbers around supply and demand through the first 5 months of this year. They were indicating healthy surpluses, not just because of weakness in demand, but also supply looking okay. So I think right now, if you're looking at supply-demand balances, we are oversupplied.
And then recently, we've seen tech stocks selling off. I've seen some people trying to draw a comparison to copper's weakness with a cool-off in technology stocks. I don't know if you would draw that comparison, but I did make the point that while copper was rallying, I'd hear all the time people remind you about its role in electric vehicles, and then when AI got hot, its role in things like data centers as well. Is there a way to quantify that part of the copper story?
It's tough to make that quantification. I think right now, these stories around EV build out and AI are longer term stories. And I think when you think about copper, if you're a long-term investor, copper makes a lot of sense. It's going to dominate over the long run. But of course, these short-term movements in price, you still get a lot of volatility. But keep in mind, I think over the long run, we are still bullish. We think copper looks like a good investment. If you're trading it in shorter periods of time, though, you need to be careful. You need to monitor what's happening in China.
And then it sounded like you talked a little bit about the renewables market in China. I guess that was one of the other things, the idea of the green transition and all the infrastructure investing associated with that, something we're watching in North America as well. Is that part of your long-term thesis of support for copper?
Absolutely. I mean, the green transition's absolutely going to be supportive of copper over the long run. It is interesting to watch, especially in places like the United States. There are questions around whether that renewable uptick might slow a bit with a potential Trump administration. Those are things that will be played out over the next several months. But again, if we're talking in increments of, say, the next 10 years, I think it's inevitable that copper demand is going to continue to rise. And that's not only going to come from places like China, but also the United States and Europe as well.
Okay, it's always helpful, too, to see what actual companies are doing against the backdrop of the macro stuff as well. As an example, you've been tracking the actions of a company called Ivanhoe Mines, which we know pretty well here. Give us a sense on what they've been saying about their business, how they are running their business right now, and how that plays into the story of copper.
Yeah, there's two keys when it comes to Ivanhoe. First, we like the leadership there. It looks strong. Obviously the head of that company has a strong track record. And so, part of the investment is just a bet on strong management and leadership there. And two, they have a, pretty powerful investment within the DRC. The mine interest that they have there is running ahead of expectations in terms of build out. So we think those two keys make Ivanhoe a very interesting long run investment prospect if you want to play copper on the equity side of things.
And then staying with company stories, we got some numbers this week from First Quantum, obviously a company that has navigated, whether they can have ownership over the long term, a very important project in Panama. I wonder if that was one of the other considerations for the market earlier this year. Just there was a lot of headline around that. Does that all of a sudden raise questions around available supply from one of the key projects in the world? Do you think that played a role in that earlier lift we were seeing for copper this year?
Absolutely. I mean, the Kpler Panama mine is extremely important. But we've seen headlines coming out that it looks like it's not going to restart this year. And so there are a lot of questions around when that project might restart. Could it be next year? Will the political situation change in Chile? I think for now, probably don't count on a restart of production this year, though.